Καλησπέρα, καλώς ήρθατε. Welcome to this, we want to welcome you to this last AGORA series talk today. I'm Angeliki Vergou, head of AGORA, and together with my colleague Niki, who is the project manager of AGORA series, we want to thank you for joining us these 2 last days, full of talks and interesting topics. I want to remind you that at 5 o'clock we have the Meet the Future presentation, which is presenting writer-directors who are developing a series. So I'm sure that the broadcasters will be here. So this is our last talk. It's called Series Content, Leading the Way to Diversity and Inclusion, which is, we believe it's absolutely true. And we have with us Peter Carlton, producer from and CEO of Warp Films, UK. Then we have with us Caroline von Kühn, Executive Director of Oxbelly and Falliro House. Director? Yes, okay. Then Mr. Konstantinos Sousoulas, Executive Director, sorry, I'm not seeing very well, and I forget. So, Chief of Content Officer in Mega TV, and of course, Yiannis Donos, Original Content Manager and Head of Acquisitions at Antenna Plus, the platform. And moderating is our dear friend Ntim from Deadline. Thank you, and to you.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see you. We've got a nice packed house again, which is great. Obviously, as Angeliki just said, we're talking about diversity and inclusion in series, and yeah, I'm going to be moderating this panel. I think we're going to start with a trailer from Yiannis. I think you had a short clip you wanted to show.
Όταν έμαθα ότι είσαι ανάπηρη, πολύ το χάρηκα.
Καλά κι εγώ.
Πολύπλοκες που είναι οι ανθρώπινες σχέσεις,
Δεν βλέπουμε μία διαφορετικότητα, αλλά βλέπουμε μία ομοιότητα.
Να μάθεις να αγαπάς και εσύ τον εαυτό σου.
Με κορόιδευαν, επειδή ο αδερφός μου ήταν ομοφυλόφιλος.
Τι! Πριν περίπου 10 μήνες έπαθα... Είχες ένα ατυχηματάκι.
Δηλαδή μεταξύ μας...
Είμαι γαμάτα.
Έχω ξεχάσει να οδηγώ, μα δεν με νοιάζει. Πατάω το πόδι μου στο γκάζι και τα τοπία όλα περνούν.
Μάντρες κοιμάσαι.
Δεν ξέρεις.
Γάματο, θα πάω από τις σκάλες.
Εσύ είσαι ενεργητικός ή παθητικός?
Δεν το πιστεύω ότι κάνουμε αυτή τη συζήτηση μέσα σε ντουλάπα.
It's a great clip. Yeah, so I'll probably start by asking you, why did you want to show that today?
Look, it's a very short trailer of the four series that we have already done. I mean, with the subject like that, inclusion and diversity, because to say 2 words about the platform is now operating about 2 years, and we have already produced about a little bit more than 10 mini-series, many premium series. 4 of them are very oriented in inclusive and diversity and all these things that before a few years was something like taboo, or nobody could talk about it or include them in mostly in free-to-air television, because, let's say, in streaming platforms, things are a little bit more safe. So it was something like a gift for us, because in my first days in the platform, I got a call from a very close friend of mine and told me that Giorgos Kapoutsidis, who is one of the most acclaimed and actor and writer and openly gay activists, let's say, and she told me that, you know, the next project of Giorgos is on, and by then we were searching about new projects, very, you know, mini-series, limited, and as edgy as it gets for the reality of Greek television. and she told me, you know, there is some difficulties though. It is only 10 episodes of 25 minutes. It is a bit expensive. He's not playing a role in the series, and is about the main character is a gay man. And I told her, okay, it ticks all the boxes that we want, apart from the expensive, of course. And it was, you know, the first project that we started to work on, and it became actually even the series that with which actually launched the platform for the first time. Yeah.
Awesome. I guess to probably open up to the rest of the panel, I guess, what has diversity and inclusion meant in your own personal work? Have you got any examples that you could share with the room? Whoever wants to take it first.
I'm going to be really speaking more in kind of the US perspective. I think today my career has been in the film festival side of things and artist development programs, and then the last 6 years in film financing. So within the US, kind of the trend I've seen in the independent space, which historically meant independently financed, now more means independently developed, perhaps with the shift in distribution and streamers. It's really been looking at what are the barriers to entry for voices that aren't already funded and distributed in film, and now also in film and TV. So it's been primarily in studying both demographics of whose work is not being experienced in front of the camera or hired for behind the camera, and building programs and finding funding to address that. And I think in episodic specifically, I think the concept of a writer's room, which is one of the things we're exploring at Oxbelly, of who's included in the creative process in that way, and a diversity of voices and experiences, is a particularly interesting topic. So yeah.
Thank you. So I'll just talk a little bit about Warp Films. I guess the first thing to say is that to some extent the company was not exactly made up of people who were socially excluded, but Mark Herbert, my business partner who founded the company, comes from a mining family, is not classically the sort of person who you'd expect to be running. TV companies in the UK tend to be run to people who went to the right schools and the right universities, and we didn't. And so already there's maybe that feeling of being outsiders and a little bit chippy and having something to prove from the beginning. And I think that one of the things that was always important for us, and still is, and I'll talk about a little bit later with the project we're doing at the moment, was to not treat diversity or inclusion as something marginal, but to place it in the mainstream. So just to talk about a couple of projects that we've done, we've done a number of series iterations of starting with a film of a show called This Is England by Shane Meadows, and the film was about, you know, a young boy who joins a group of skinheads, white skinheads, and I guess it really attracted an audience. In fact, it attracted quite a lot of skinheads and right-wing people, and certainly attracted sort of young working-class men, white working-class men, to watch it. And then there's a whole storyline that one of the skinheads is mixed heritage, and then in the end is very savagely beaten by the kind of the skinhead gang leader, Combo, played by Stephen Graham. And there's this complication that actually he himself, and this is true of Stephen, is mixed heritage. So it suddenly upended a lot of expectations about race, and in a way it wasn't talking about race specifically, it was talking about identity, it was talking about the problems of identity, complications, self-hatred, all sorts of things. And it somehow, we found to this day, lots of kids, young people watch it because they want to watch the show and they feel that it's cool, and not because they want to watch a show about race or inclusivity, and then they have the debate about it. In a very different way, a couple of years ago we made a show called Little Birds that's based on Anais Nin's erotic short stories, and the creator of the show, Sophia Almeria, is Qatari American, and it was based in 1955 Tangier, and obviously that's a kind of the moment of independence, so there's an awful lot to be talked about there about kind of colonial heritage and post-colonialism, about the relationship of the Arab world to the Western world, but also about queer identity and, entre guillemets, straight identity. And yet that wasn't what the show was about. The show was an erotic melodrama, and people watched it for that, and then the other stuff. And I think it's important not to, that's in no way to sort of underplay the issues. It's to say, don't expect somebody to come to something to watch an issue. And in a certain way, whether you're talking about class or, you know, racial identity or disability or whatever, is not to make a character or a story reduced to that, but to bring that as an essential element of a story that can be completely mainstream.
Okay, actually, we started 3-4 years ago on Mega, and back then in Greek television, I remember the A Word, which is a project that we adapted from BBC for Alpha TV. And it was, I believe, our first very, very straight story concerning a boy who was in the autism phasma. Then in Mega, we acquired and produced a project called Commandos and Dragons, where the main lead actor was a boy with severe handicaps. And disabilities, but with a great supernatural talent for casting situation. It was, a sci-fi series. We continued acquiring and producing 2 major mini-series, Maestro in Blue and Milky Way. In Maestro in Blue, we have a couple of 2 gays boys in a very small community in the island of Paxos, where everything has to be, a secret of the relationship. And when this relationship, this love affair between the 2 boys gets in the son, the father of one lead character, really bursts out and has a very, very bad behavior against his own child. And Milky Way, where the 2 lead characters, and one of them is a queer gay boy who was living with his mother in Athens, and his mother sent him to one small town in the North Greece in order to meet his father and to find out things about his father, because they were divorced and his father lives there. So he comes from Athens with a lot of, with his nails, with another look, with extreme look. And we watch his relationship with his father, but this father tries to come close to his child, not judging or not caring about the diverse, nature of him, but because he grew up without knowing him, he just wanted to know the human boy. So we tried a lot to acquire, and I'm thinking that when we were deciding these productions, and it was only because we liked a lot the scripts, not because we have to tick a box, okay, let's do this, because we have to include the diversity. We liked so much the scripts, and when, I'm happy, thank you for calling me here, but when, because of this panel, I was thinking, okay, we have to talk about the diversity and inclusion and the minority populations all over the world, especially in USA, are increasing, and in 1 or 2 decades, they're going to be majority. The minority population at this moment, in 20 years, it might be the majority population. So it's commercial-wise to acquire and to produce such stories, because the audience gets larger. But the truth is always a matter of story. if the script and the story is good, this is the first always criteria in order to acquire or to produce such a story. And so before I came to Thessaloniki, I tried to read some things, and I went over something that I read from Shona Rhimes, from her speech, "You Are Not Alone," who said, "I really hate the word diversity. It suggests something other, as if it's something special or rare diversity, as if there's something unusual about telling stories involving women and people of color and LGBTQ characters on TV. I have a different word, normalizing. We try to normalize television. We try to make television look like the world really looks." And I was, you know, I think this is the point of what we're talking today.
Awesome. You mentioned, you spoke a lot about story there, and I know we have a lot of series screenwriters or producers in the audience, so I wondered if you guys could talk a little bit about putting, I guess, a diverse or inclusive story together as one that looks like the world. How does that change the process of writing or finding writers or finding crew? I know, Peter, you're working on an interesting project now. You might have a good POV on this, but yeah, how do things change? How does the process have to adapt?
Well, in a weird way, that project's almost an exception in the way that we're putting it together. The project that Zach's referring to is a series that we're making with the BBC called Reunion, and it's a revenge thriller about a profoundly deaf man who comes out of prison after serving 10 years for the killing of another deaf man. And, you know, his probation is that he can't go back to the town that he's from, and he can't see the widow of the guy he killed. So, of course, we know what he does next. He goes back to the town, and he also meets his teenage daughter, who hasn't seen him for 10 years. And it's the story of, we discover, of course, we think, is he going to be innocent? And in fact, he's not innocent. He did kill this other deaf man, but why? And what led him to do that? And what has he come back to solve? And so it ticks all the boxes, if you like, in terms of diversity, that we have a profoundly deaf main character, and is being played by a profoundly deaf actor. There's a lot of signing, so a large amount of it is going to be subtitled, which in the UK, really, I mean, we do get subtitles, but basically we don't watch anything that isn't, we don't generally watch anything that's, you know, non-English language, is the fact, because as you know, British people don't speak any other language other than English, which makes us a minority. Oh no, anyway, whatever. But there's this, what was weird about it was that the way it happened was that William Major, the writer, just loved the work that we'd done before. He loved Dead Man's Shoes in particular, and the fact that often our films are about, they have a social aspect to them, usually very much a sort of questioning social aspect. They're often about outsiders, but they're often genre films, so they're horror films or they're thrillers. And a lot of other people don't. They do things that are more drama-y. So he really wanted to come to us because he really wanted to make a mainstream thriller. And when we first saw the script, we went, this is the most exciting thriller we've read. And we took it to the BBC going, we've got this great primetime thriller. We didn't take it to the BBC going, we have this great show about a deaf guy, by a deaf guy. And they were like, but the protagonist is deaf. And we're like, oh yeah, well, it's by a deaf writer kind of thing. So once you then embark on that, of course, in that particular instance, you have to do an awful lot of things, which is, if you have a lot of profoundly deaf people, and particularly people who sign, or even people who lip read, then you have to be aware of that on set. You have to be aware of that even early on. You put out a casting call. If you want deaf actors, you can't put out a casting call where people just speak. You have to be aware of literacy issues that some deaf people, even with reading and speaking, don't do it as easily. So you have to think how you get to, how you make the people you want to talk to feel included. So that's set a particular set of problems. But in a way, I guess our basis has always been, you used the phrase, television or stories should reflect the world outside. And I think our view is that the people making the stories should reflect the world outside as far as possible. Hence, the not having everyone come from the same university or the same school. Certainly not having everyone come from the same background, skin color, the same level of ability, disability, whatever you want to call it. And in a way, trying to make that apply for every show that you do. So we do things like have, you know, we have a kind of, it's not a quota system exactly, but we do check all of our writers' lists. Every time we have a writers' room, we do check all of our crew lists. We just routinely make sure that we are at least going out to and trying to go out to and trying to share opportunities with people regardless of who they are. And in fact, seeing that, you know, we have a show at the moment that's about a power struggle in a closed order of nuns, but we have a very diverse writing room because actually it's a microcosm of the world, so it needs to reflect the world and not easily fall into a thing of, you know, I mean, actually, nuns are very, very, you know, if you look at communities of nuns, they're super diverse, often because it's a place where they could run away from the world, so it kind of fits. And we have a show, I'll shut up in a minute, sorry, I'm rabbiting on, but there's a show actually I'm developing here with Neda Films in Greece, which is a horror show, and it actually concerns AI, but almost by accident, our main two characters, without massive spoiler alert, only two people survive, and one of them is a very old person in a wheelchair, and the other is a very young woman who is deaf-mute. And it's almost like if you have the world, if you have a group of people reflecting the world who make stories, then those things naturally occur in stories rather than having to go out and specifically look for them. Sorry, I rabbited a bit, but I hope
that was great.
Agreed, that was great. I think to echo what both of you are saying, I mean, this panel is titled Diversity and Inclusion, which thank goodness we're past the time of just talking about diversity of, you know, I think in the US there was a trend for the right reasons because of a very, you know, white dominant culture within the United States of who is, you know, afforded to tell their stories, who's afforded education, all the barriers within the US systems, that then there was a look at, all right, which communities are being excluded also within, you know, very, you know, able-bodied, white, you know, very, you know, older male kind of dominant storytelling culture. And at the beginning, the conversations around, all right, who's not in this room? But then the more evolved conversation is, well, what is the composition of this room and what's the invitation to enter this room? Because there's one thing to get into a room, but there's another to be afforded agency or any form of power within that room. And I think, you know, when I started out my career, I could tell when I was supported as a producer that my headshot showing that there was a woman they'd included was very helpful for an organization. And so that was kind of the trend probably 20 years ago. And luckily now the conversations are much more evolved. And, you know, and I would say that at San Francisco Film Society, where I worked about 6 years ago, there was this grant for fiction writers that were exploring issues of social justice. And the idea was that if you get $25,000 or $75,000, you're afforded the time that it takes to further evolve your writing. So you're not meeting with, you know, an executive or someone in a position of power that may not have the deeper shared vocabulary of what your experience is and might approach the work to check a box for their company or for kind of whatever that trend is. So again, I think in the US, luckily, a movement into empowering by offering funding much earlier on is what affords someone to have agency, you know, with their voice. So in Writer's Room, the same thing. There were a lot of these companies had kind of diversity initiatives and would hire someone to find non-white writers in the room, but then the person of color had to represent every non-white character. And I have friends who were like, as an Asian woman, I'm not going to be the one to write the black man's experience. Like, where it's so oversimplified of what is like othered, you know, and that wasn't that long ago of what I'm referencing. And so luckily, I think the shift, and to your point about the shift of audience composition, that to me is the most exciting thing in the US, that it's not just the altruistic and well-intentioned people in different positions attempting to shift who's afforded to tell stories, and to your point, on their own terms, that I don't have to just write female characters or represent women on a panel. It's like, it's the ideas, it's your experience, and that happens to be the lens through which you're writing. I think that's the hope of where we get to. And I think for writers' rooms, knowing that your audience is going to be much more diverse is very exciting, and you're seeing the business shifts. And I think streamers, we have a lot of different feelings, and they come up, of course, on every panel. But in some ways, what's been good in that is the democratization of looking at representation, meaning that that's actually the business model. You have to get to that audience, and they're going to see if you have a bunch of people who have nothing to do with the deeper meaning of a story or deepening a character, drafting, writing, or quickly meeting a deadline. So I think I love that quote. I totally agree with that. And that's a really exciting power dynamic that I'm interested of how that's translating internationally as well, because I think it's an exciting time to really figure out the appropriate way to invest in those voices to tell their own stories.
I think those are all really interesting points, and one thing that springs out in my mind when I think about that immediately is sort of like you're talking about giving people agency and investing, and also sort of making concessions, well, not concessions, but changes in how you work, maybe hiring people who sign on the set or who can understand. And then immediately I think of budgeting. I know that's probably going to be an issue for many people, and not every market has the same amount of cash flowing around. The UK or the US might be very different to Greece. I wonder how does this sort of mind change or mind shift affect budgeting, and particularly in the local market? I guess you guys might have an insight on that.
I don't know how it affects it. I mean, budgets are always, strict, especially in Greece. You know what I mean. I was listening another panel 2 hours ago, about budgets and time and money, and that you need time in order to develop correctly, and time always means money. So. Things are really difficult in that field in Greece, except when you're co-producing, with a lot of other organizations abroad, and you can have the time you need in order to develop. If you need to include in this procedure, for example, when Commandos and Dragons was produced with this boy with the severe handicaps, everything on set had to be really different in order to have the right shooting, because you could not work with this boy for 8 to 10 hours as we were usually working with other actors, so we had to work 2 to 3 hours, and I believe that maybe a lot of some extra days needed to be shooted. But all this was part of a budget that was already green-lighted. So it's not easy. It's more expensive to include stories with, diverse disabled, but not all the stories. Okay, when we're talking about genders or colors or LGBT, it's okay. There's no problem. Budgets are budgets. You have to. I cannot say something further on this topic.
When we talked in our prep call about this, the job I had before this was a film financing program for Sundance Institute, and our kind of work with the investors was to both acknowledge the risk tied to market, but also suggest that there's still some bias in the market of what is perceived as smaller film or a smaller story, and so actually better resourcing above maybe some of the projections for a certain film is what affords that film to break through in a very cluttered market. And so that really was was really working with funders to do case studies of, there was a film, Crip Camp, that had gone through the program before I worked there, with a disabled director and activist, Jim Lebrecht, who had co-directed this film with Nicole. And so they had budgeted very specifically around the support of the subjects of the documentary, who were all had gone to this camp in Vermont in the 70s called Camp Jenner for disabled children. And so it was a very, to me, the budget is always exposes the ethics and creative decisions and ethical decisions of any film or series. So for that film, they basically walked through our investors of understanding the additional financial risk they were taking on, but also the ethics of why that one really was the only way to work with the community whose story they were telling, with a director from that community, and then two, that actually would be what elevated that film. And they were very lucky that they had higher ground in Netflix as their distributor, so they were very well resourced when it came to the release of the film and all the expenses. But it is a learning curve, and there's so many blind spots, including for, in the US of films led by, writer-directors, of color, of saying, like, don't call me a smaller film and then have me underpay the crew and basically exploit others who are also underrepresented in the process. So one of the jobs at Sundance was to shift the demographic, the racial composition of the investor class. So that way, when these filmmakers were presenting, it wasn't just teaching white people how to talk about race and understand some of those power dynamics, but actually when the filmmakers walked into the room, it was a almost white minority cohort, which is not what you usually experience in the US when you're going into take a meeting with someone who's going to decide your fate of financing or distributing your film. So again, looking at those power dynamics at each step of the decision-making process and including in budgeting, but as an independent filmmaker, it feels scary. You got to raise the money, so why would you budget higher than what you can afford? So it's tricky. It's not always, it doesn't work, but I always encourage that kind of at least approach for as long as possible.
Just chip in quickly. Oh, go on, Yiannis.
Okay, please.
No, you want to? Yeah.
I would like to add to this that, in a territory like Greece, a very small territory, the budgets are very expensive for the series that you want to produce. And even when it goes to a platform that they have targeted as a strategy to have premium small TV series, the budget is even higher. And of course, the past 3-4 years, I don't remember how many, we have this cash rebates and all this help from state, but it's not enough because Greek content is not very easy to travel abroad. So you need to make an effort to either co-produce with other countries when you have a subject that it can travel to their territories also, or find some other creative things or corporate things, let's say sponsorships or stuff like that, to have a help from them. Another thing that we have as a company is that we are not at all in the co-production procedure, because as a strategy, the group has decided that it wants all the IP, the 100% of IPs worldwide, so everything we have everywhere. So we have to find all the budget, all the finance by ourselves. And in this production, in the first production, of course, it was easier. But in the second production with the disabled people, which none of them was an actor, all was disabled people, the production went sky high because it was a lot of things that it couldn't have been foreseen. So thank God we had a very capable production team and a very optimistic amount on unforeseen expenses, which, draw from there some money. So it's very difficult for, but it's optimistic though that the past couple of years, Greek content has drawn some attention internationally. So maybe a source of income, maybe it will come from international market. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. There's sort of two perspectives on this show Reunion. There are, access costs, which, if you're facilitating having other, interpreters and so on the set, there's clearly an additional cost. But interestingly, and that has been recognised by the BBC, and up to a point, everyone's gone, yeah, this is really important at this stage in particular. You see it almost like as an R&D, or to come back to your point, it's an audience development cost. If you want to reach a more diverse audience, if you actually want to reach the world that is out there, then you're going to have to put some money into that exercise. But the other side is that even to come with that idea of, to include diverse stories or include people with disabilities or whatever, kind of is an added cost, is already to come from the idea that there is a normal cost. And I guess any of us sitting here would know that there is no such thing as a normal cost. There's a way of doing things which is perceived to be the correct way of doing things in television and film, and is often unbelievably wasteful, unbelievably indulgent, money spent on the wrong things. The number of times, we'll have seen somebody insisting they have the crane shot or the helicopters or the car chase, and it doesn't even make it into the final program. So there's also a mindset, and I'm really not saying in any way, diverse stories should be cheaper. Let's not fall into that trap. There's just clever ways of doing things, and in particular, if you're making a show with a lot of deaf people, talk to them about how stuff works, because you know what? They spend their lives negotiating the world and doing it in smart ways that hearing people can't even imagine. Let them tell you how to do it, and it's all of that. It's like if you want genuine inclusive stories, then also bring an inclusive skill set. Also bring just smarter, different ways of doing stuff. And if everybody's there in the same boat of going, what we want to do is make mainstream entertainment content for an audience, we want our financiers to be happy and to come back and give us finance next time, then put everybody in the same boat of saying, how do we do this well and how do we reach people, rather than going, oh look, it's an inclusivity show, so it's charity. It's really not, guys. It's about commercial good sense, but that's having respect for the people who you're working with and letting them bring the solutions often.
Awesome. Talking about sort of making mainstream content and commercially minded content that is diverse or inclusive, as we spoke previously about sort of Greece Greece socially has been boundary pushing in many different ways, but I think you brought up the success of something, or the response to something like Milky Way, which has been criticized on one side and beloved on another. I don't know if Orestes is here actually, but it's a great show. And there's, as you mentioned, there's the influence of things like the church or whatever. I wondered, how do you balance the sort of creative process, creative work, with the, I guess maybe you could say, the social confines of the society that you live in? How do you sort of balance that when you're trying to make, something that you want to be on a broadcaster, or you just want to have a wide audience?
We're doing Milky Way, and then we're doing St. Paisios. I don't know if you know the series. This is the way to balance this diversity. It's Milky Way is a very, very nice project, which has a lot of diverse people in a lot of characters, and that generated a lot of discussion in Greece. And some of these dynamic discussions was generated by two very, very opposite poles. And the only way that you can try to not to reunion, to be, as much happy with all this, is to not to stop talking about it, not being afraid not, for one moment, because you're listening to a different opinion. And maybe sometimes the different opinion can be expressed aggressively, but you must not be afraid. I believe that this phenomenon was always in the history of making series or films. The extra, controversial matters. But this is life. It's what I said. We're trying to acquire or to produce stories which really are as the world really looks. And the world has the church, has also people who do not believe in God, has people who are different color, people who like, have a different sex criteria. So it's all a question of talking. Don't be afraid, just talking each other all the time and trying to find the bridges between all this. You cannot do anything else. I mean, what can you do? You can bomb the priests who say, "Oh my God, Milky Way, it's a devil's work." No, you cannot do that. Also, you cannot do the opposite. All the queer characters, when we see St. Paisius with mini-serious religious, very good religious, they say, "Oh, what this garden?" You cannot do that. You have to find bridges. This is my opinion.
Yeah. I think that at the time Greece is a boiling pot, let's say, because you hear opinions like Costa said about church, that they don't only shout about projects like Milky Way, that is a very provocative or something like that, but even projects like comedies that they are taking place in a monastery. So the church goes in news and says, "Don't watch this show. It's never happened. These come nuns. There's not killers," and stuff like that. On the other way, because we are preparing also a community, a thematic community, religious community, I have the chance to talk with a lot of people of church, or of the official Greek church, and it seems like the things are changing slowly, but they are changing. And they are ready to open up and speak about the diversity, about everything. And now we are preparing a show that it will be like a TEDx show. In the office we call it Priestex, but it's only an internal joke. But they're able and very willing to speak about what really church thinks about homosexuality or other things, and not in the far right opinion of the old church. And I think that we will see some things there that will be very optimistic for the Greece, for all the content that we will see in the recent years. It's very good to know all this.
That's really interesting too. I think one of the things we try to bear in mind, and a lot of the writers and creators we work with try to bear in mind, is like sometimes you would just want to make a really angry, confrontational show that goes, whatever, expletive, "This is my life, accept it." And that's fine, and there's a time for that, but there's also a time for like, if you want to particularly reach yourself, a broader audience, more than just the people like you, then you have to think, how do I give them a point of access? Which is not about, turning up in a suit and pretending you're straight if you're, gay and normally wear dresses or whatever it might be. But it's about going, what's my points of contact? And we often talk about, as we're doing here, if you're at a dinner party or you're in the pub or the cafe and you're telling a story, you do look at the audience and you check whether they're bored, whether they're looking at their phone, whether they're looking outraged, whether they've all stopped laughing. Q laughed anyway, and so it's really important to remember that very same thing. We're storytellers, and because we're egotists and we love attention, we want as many people as possible to love us and love our stories. So you find, for everyone in the audience, you're trying to find that thing that they relate to. So regardless of who you are and what your sexual preferences, your politics are, you're trying to find that point of connection. I think that's such the basis of storytelling. And that's a thing to remember, whether you're making so-called mainstream stories or so-called, again, it's getting away from this diversity and going like normalization, is to say, regardless of who we are, share and be open. There will always be the haters, guys. We know that, as you said, there will always be the haters. But then there will also be the people who go, oh my God, it's like the kind of the mother or the father who learns to love their son or daughter who was gay and they never thought they would. There's a point of humanity, and I think that's the bit we're always looking for. And looking for that in the story is the most important thing. We're looking for connections. And bearing that in mind, and like I said, not softening anything, but also not closing the doors, not assuming that because you're a certain type of person, other people won't be interested. Not assuming because, I'm a middle-aged white man that I only have certain views and no one else is going to be interested in them. Not assuming because you're an 8-year-old, Indian kid that you're going to be. I think just going, what are our connections, is just the big, big thing. And that can come in writers' rooms, that can come in the company, that can come in talking about the stories that you're making to people who aren't in the world of television is super important early on, because you're just saying, is anyone out there listening to me? Is anyone responding? Is this meaning anything to them? And if you keep checking that, I think that is one of the ways of getting over that sort of social division that we were talking about.
I would like to comment here that the fact that the minority population are increasing everywhere in the world, combined with the fact that everybody in these years has the ability to stream, to SVOD, so to choose what they want to see. These two facts combined each other are strengthening all the diversity, the inclusion of diversity, because you can make more project diverse and inclusive, and to represent in these a lot of group of people that in traditionally old linear television you cannot do it so easily, and this is very, very. So I mean, there is a lot of room for human stories, diverse and human stories.
And I think oversimplifying, the danger is, as you were saying, the danger of oversimplifying an artist to have to represent their identity politics or demographic only, and how problematic. That is same thing for audiences. Like me, an assumption of what I might watch isn't just tied to my, race or age or gender. So I think that's kind of if marketers aren't if distributors aren't sophisticated of understanding, exactly to your point, if the streamers really have opened that up. So while the algorithms or, kind of the way they're working in three verticals might narrow certain, area, buckets of storytelling, there still also is the possibility of breaking open so much at the same time, which is exciting. And at a time when the market is so cluttered with so much having been made and so many streamers out there, so many ways you can view something, having something that is unique and told on its own terms is so much more important, which is exciting for that business to drive the additional kind of finding funding and support for the creatives who do want to tell stories on their own terms and not feel the deep obligation of speaking on behalf of however someone else might overly distill, their identity.
We're kind of strapped for time, so I think I'll probably open up to the audience if anybody wants to ask a question to our illustrious panel.
Okay, thank you for this. Is the Δουλεύει? Ναι, okay, sorry. I've been listening very carefully, and what comes to mind with every speaker, and you're talking about your content and getting it out there, etc., is do you make content knowing your audience, or do you make content not knowing your audience? How do you make that final decision? This is the part that I think is tricky.
Good question.
I will speak on the side of the platforms. Streaming platforms is something very different. Let's say for the first year, you are testing. You produce a lot of series, a lot of projects that you see what it works and what was not. And if you watch all the demographics and all the ups and downs that the views and the unique viewers are, then you are pretty sure that a kind of this kind of genre, a TV series or documentary, docu-series, everything, it will work again. So it's on the safe side, let's say, for You can predict that you are almost sure when you produce something for a platform. On free-to-air, I think it's a totally different discussion.
Not so different, but we try to get to know as much as we can our viewers, the demographics, to research. We're doing it every day, but it always talk of linear television, Greek linear television. It's much more conservative, and for example, we try to find things, projects that are labeled for 8 years old and not 12, 16, because we need to rerun all these series. Then this is an economic reason that we are conservative, and we don't, invest to a lot of 18 years old series or 16 years old. In terms of content, it's always a matter of we're trying to pull a lot of different demographics that you cannot find in linear. In the last years, we are failing, because everybody is leaving traditional linear television and is going on searching what he wants to see in streamers, in platforms, in VOD. So there's a big transformation for linear terrestrial television at this moment that we're talking. Everybody has a huge question marks. And we try to experiment a little bit, so we acquired the Milky Way, which is an edgy, very nice but edgy mini-series for linear TV, in order to see what is going to happen, how this is going to curate all the audiences. But I believe that what we're living at this moment is really a lot of big, amazing audiences leaving free television and going to streaming and platforms. And the linear...
access to this information, but so if you need the access to, you could get access to this information, I don't know.
We have access. Nielsen reports to us all the demographics, you have all the access and all the knowledge.
So based on that, you can say, okay, my audience, I could make something like this, could you reach an audience?
Yes, what we see is that old age people are the audiences of free TV, terrestrial TV.
Yeah, my mother.
This is all the young people is leaving, is going somewhere to Antenna Plus, to Netflix, to HBO, to Amazon. This is a fact. Huh?
Thank you for the first place.
It was only because I'm kind.
I think for the producer, it's a slightly different position. Obviously, when a show is going out, you do get the data. The rest of the time, it's like you're in the fog. You don't really know. in terms of, and I think there's advantages and disadvantages. You know, we're supposed as creatives to hate data. I think actually data is great. The question about data is how you interpret it, and soon AI will do that even better than we do. But for the moment, we like to think we have the edge. And I can't remember who it is. There was a phrase that said the trick, often in making a successful show, is making something that people didn't know they wanted yet, rather than making the show that they loved last year. Because the second one they won't necessarily love as much as the first one, and they didn't know they wanted the first one. You know, nobody knew they wanted Stranger Things, nobody knew they wanted Breaking Bad, nobody knew they wanted The Wire, and yet we talk about these in revered terms and are trying to repeat that trick. So there's a weird kind of schizophrenia where on the one hand you're going, okay, we're not going to listen to any of this data shit. We're not going to listen to the broadcasters when they say, we want a crime procedural. We're just going to do what we believe. And then on the other hand, you're going, but I really want to reach an audience. And maybe, actually, I'm totally out of touch. So I think there's a thing, it comes back to this inclusivity in the making. You know, even though it's a small writer's room or a small company, you know, we do have access to quite a lot of people. We've got families and friends. And you test things out. I mean, you know, I go home and I go to the pub and I talk to people who are not in the business, and they have very little interest in what I do. So I get like a 5-second window before they start talking about cars, mortgages, and their kids' school and football. And so they go, yeah, Pete, what are you doing? And I go, well, I'm making this show about, usually I've lost them, but if I'm lucky, I get in a word, you know, nuns, or I don't know, something. And suddenly, and you just know the ones that click. And you know, and then you go, I've got a hunch there's something out there. And I think it's that mixture of not, I think if you start making a show for an audience in the sense of trying to tailor it specifically, that way madness lies. You often make something that feels very derivative and like it was made by a committee. But knowing who you're talking to, having a real idea of their tastes, their sense of humor, and then having that conversation is really important. And that's where I think we're on the same side as the broadcasters. It's not us trying to get original content behind these horrible people with their data. It's like, share, give me your data. And actually, let's talk. They know their audience. And let's talk about what would you dream about your audience is seeing next year. What's the show that excited you that you thought was going to fail? And then, like maybe Milky Way, everyone was going, whoa. And then actually it's more successful. And then you go, oh, let's do... I think there's a fantastic conversation between information technology and hunch and staying open to people around you, which is kind of quite exciting.
I would like to say that 3 weeks ago, we woke up in the morning and 1 million people, audiences, were lost from our data because we had the wrong measurement there. And everybody start talking, okay, what we're doing. Every morning we're waking up and looking at data, and we're looking for 1 million people. The other day for 500,000 people going there or missing. Well, this is crazy. So for us, it's very important, not because of that, but Milky Way, for example, had medium performance, not very good, not bad. It was, you know, a medium straight performance. But all the comments in the digital, in social media, in your neighbor, in your office, were fantastic. And this has started making sense for us. Yeah. You know, except Nielsen and... So you're measuring it. Yeah. Also, we take reports, digital reports, you know, from social media, and it's very, very important. You know, the brand, the evaluation, because everybody's writing. You can see critics. You can. This is very, very. It's not just data.
Any other questions? Cool. I think that means you guys did your jobs. And we're just on time, so we'll wrap up. Thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.